Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure to be here at the Seoul International Finance Forum today. I think if we were at the 17th International Forum some 12 months ago, no one would have predicted the last 12 months. Certainly, we didn't predict the last 12 months at Macquarie. It's been a year of unexpected surprises, some shocks and volatility. And I suppose in some quarters that's led to a prevailing sentiment in terms of outlook for investment opportunities as, people taking a negative attitude. But actually we are very confident and optimistic about not just the next 12 months, more importantly, the next few decades. And so what I wanted to do is really spend some time today explaining why. So in terms of, I suppose, Asia's market conditions, the good news is that the macro outlook remains very positive. Not only is Asia home to more than half the world's population, but its population will grow to some 5 billion people by 2030. So to put this in perspective, the ASEAN region, which is home today of some 650 million people, is expected to grow to some 850 by 2030. That's obviously very good and very strong population growth. And I suppose augmenting that large-scale population is the fact that Asia is the world's GDP engine. Asia will have 5 of the world's top 10 economies by 2030. And accompanying these economies is obviously the fact that large growing capital markets are increasingly important not just to the region, but to the flow of capital and to investment opportunities around the world. And I think one of the best indicators about the attractiveness of Asia over the last 15 years, and a good indicator for the future, is the steady inflow of FDI into the region. And when you speak to CIOs and chairmen from institutional investors around the world, people are increasingly awakening to the fact that Asia presents very good investment opportunities. And so I suppose the key question is, what's underpinning this macro outlook? And I think the biggest theme that we're seeing is urbanization. Currently, we are witnessing the largest wave of migration in human history. Some 700 million people will move into urban areas over the next 15 years. In fact, next year will be the first time in Asia's history that more people live in cities than in rural areas. So to put this in perspective, China's urbanization rate today is 57%. That is where the US was in the 1930s. And if you think back over the last 80 to 100 years of economic history in America, what we've seen is an unprecedented period of entrepreneurialism, of innovation and wealth creation. So what we know is that as countries become more urban, they generally become much wealthier. And so as a consequence of urbanization, what we're seeing around the world, but in particular in Asia, is the rise of cities, and specifically the rise of megacities. 9 out of the 15 megacities globally are located in Asia. So why is the rise of cities exciting? And why is that so important to the future of Asia? Well, fundamentally, it's because the rise of cities with their dense populations and economic activity have long been the drivers of innovation. Density, that is people density, spurs innovation by pushing people together so that ideas come together so they can be combined and recombined. And as we have advancements in communications and in transportation, where we move from railroads to high-speed rail and so on, what we see is an increased circulation of goods and people, but also ideas as well. And I think Seoul is a good example of this. Seoul's evolution as a megacity, one of the world's most cosmopolitan, innovative cities, has underpinned, if you like, Korea's prosperity and Korea's own economic miracle over the last 20 years. Just as importantly, what we're seeing as, I suppose, Asia urbanize is we're seeing the emergence of a vast, significant middle class in Asia. 1.5 billion people in Asia are now considered to be in the middle class. And actually, this growth has been much faster than was forecast by the World Bank in either 2000 or 2010. Importantly, we expect to see in Asia 3.5 billion people in the middle class by 2030. So that's opening up a huge new market within the region. Complementing this trend is the fact that Asia is now more connected than ever before. There are 3.7 billion mobile subscribers in Asia, and Alibaba alone accounts for 25% of all global e-commerce. Asia is also leading the world in terms of technology innovation. Last year, 50% of the world's startup unicorns, that is, companies that are in a startup phase with an initial valuation in excess of $1 billion US, came from Asia. That statistic, that trend, that phenomenon would have been unheard of 10 years ago. And Asian consumers are also adopting technology much faster than other regions. So if you look at, say, mobile payment systems, the take-up estimate in Asia today is in excess of 50%. In the US, about 20% of consumers are using mobile payment systems. Again, I think this underlies the fact that we have a huge adoption and a big scale opportunity in financial services, in banking in Asia. And complementing, as we know, this rise of cities, the rise of the middle class, is the fact that obviously Asia is becoming much wealthier. The rise of the middle class is seeing a surge in Asia's total savings, which by 2020 will account for about half of the world's overall savings. And so as a consequence, we're seeing a rapid rise in AUM in Asia, growing almost twice the rate of North America. So what I would say is, while many people today are nervous about the future, particularly after the last 12 months we've had, actually the world in many ways is wealthier, it's smarter, and it's healthier than ever before. And that change, if you like, is being led by Asia. And that's why we have enormous reason to be optimistic, not just about the next decade, but about the many decades to come. In short, urbanization, the rise of cities, increasing wealth and connectivity is changing the way people live. And this is creating significant investment opportunities across a range of sectors, including for financial services firms. And in terms of the big opportunities, I'd like to just talk about 4 areas today which I think demonstrate the potential and confidence that we have in Asia. And they are renewable energy, smart cities, consumer demand, and scale markets. Urbanization, coupled with strong government policy, has prioritized renewables as a key source of energy in most markets in Asia. In many ways, Asia is facing an energy trilemma because of its rapid growth. It has an energy deficit today, it needs energy, but it needs it to be affordable, and it obviously needs it to be clean. Over the last 2 years, 50% of global renewable energy investments have been made in Asia, some $300 billion of investments. To put this in perspective, Japan installed 15 gigawatts of solar in 2016, and China is installing on average 1 wind turbine every hour. The world's largest solar farms today exist in India and China. Yet more than 600 million people in Asia still live without electricity. So this gives you a sense of the magnitude of the opportunity. And I suppose why this is exciting from an investment point of view is we know that renewable energy over a 20 to 30 year period delivers very stable returns and high quality yields. And so for institutional investors, like pension funds, like insurance companies, that are looking to match long-dated liabilities with long-dated assets, the huge demand and investment opportunities in renewable energies presents a very clear opportunity to be able to make long-term quality investments in many markets around the world. And as a consequence, we think that presents opportunities not just to invest directly in the producers of electricity, but obviously also in the providers of services and technology. And so for investors looking at unlisted opportunities or looking at listed opportunities, this is a sector that has emerged very rapidly. And as it becomes more globalized, as it becomes more commercialized, as it becomes a cheaper source and a more competitive source of energy, it's pretty clear that while we may see disruption to carbon-based energy sources, they are being replaced by renewable sources, and that obviously presents very good investing opportunities. Asia's rapid urbanization and rising populations is obviously also putting pressure on cities. And so more than ever, cities need to be smarter. They need to be more efficient in terms of providing access to public services, to providing access to utilities, to being able to operate in a more efficient fashion. And as a consequence, this has given rise to the concept of the smart city, which leverages technology to provide solutions that enable development, innovation, and a better quality of life, effectively allowing you to have a more efficient, more effective use of your resources. And as a consequence, again, we're seeing lots of interesting opportunities here in terms of the Internet of Things, in terms of big data, in terms of smart meters, in terms of data centers, in terms of traffic monitoring. So as we see urbanization occur and as we see the rise of cities, the way we live is changing. We know that the way we will live in the next 10 to 20 years will be different than today. We don't know how necessarily it will be different, but what it is doing is spurring innovation and creating a lot of new opportunities that frankly didn't exist 10 years ago. And I think that's going to be an ongoing theme. Importantly, if you think about Asia's rising middle class, it's obviously creating huge consumer demand. In fact, it's really transforming Asia from a manufacturing hub to a consumption powerhouse. So as a consequence, people in Asia are obviously seeking a better quality of life for themselves and their families. We want to be healthier. We want to be better educated. We want to travel more. We want more opportunities for our families. And so if you look at, say, healthcare as an example, we're saying a huge increase in spending. Asia's healthcare market is expected to grow to $500 billion by 2017. That's 10% growth on the prior year. And this type of growth is being mirrored in other sectors, such as tourism and education. Last year, 133 million outbound Chinese tourists visited various parts of the world, but ostensibly they traveled to other parts of Asia and spent more than $100 billion. So again, what we're seeing is as countries open up, as they become more developed, we're seeing the benefits for the world, but in particular, we're primarily seeing the benefits for regions like Asia, where people are generally traveling closer to home. So I think as we can see, the rise of Asia's middle class with spending and connectivity is creating a whole new set of opportunities for investors. And it's also changing the way financial services thinks about providing opportunities to these investors. The way we bank, the way we provide hedge products, the types of commodities we can trade are evolving very quickly. Last year, Macquarie did the first ever PET plastic bottle hedge. It's never been done before, and in a matter of 12 months, it's created a significant industry where more than 15 financial services are now providing similar products. So as we come up with new technologies, we also create new financial services products. I think, obviously, when we think about where the biggest opportunities are in Asia, it's going to be in the scale markets. Markets such as Korea, Japan, India, ASEAN, and China. These are the markets with the big populations, with the big pools of capital that have a real demand for new services, for new products, and are very early adopters of technology. In terms of scale markets, I think if you use China as an example and you look at the numbers, the opportunity set across an array of sectors are obviously quite extraordinary. And the good thing about a lot of these markets in Asia is that they're actually becoming more liberal and becoming more accessible than ever before. So if you take China as an example, it now has 11 free trade zones. And initiatives such as Stock Connect are making it easier for international investors to access the Shanghai and the Shenzhen stock markets. Now, obviously, a lot of these markets are complex, and they're quite new for investors, they're quite new for financial services firms. So being able to navigate them and identify the right business opportunities is obviously key to the medium term. But I think, if you go back to the one statistic, which is China today is where the US was from an urbanization point in 1930, the vast potential of that market for new services, for new products, including in financial services, is obviously very significant. And so that's why we're excited, not necessarily about the next 1 or 2 years, but when we take a longer-term view, we are very optimistic about the future, remembering that if you look back at GDP growth over the last 50 years, generally speaking, every year the world grows some 2 to 3%, and we expect that to continue. So in terms of a summary, I think there's really kind of 4 key points to highlight. Asia's macro outlook remains very positive. We live in a growing and dynamic region. In fact, the rapid growth of the middle class, despite recent global events, makes us more positive about the next 50 to 100 years than we were, say, some 2 to 3 years ago. Complementing that growth of the middle class is the fact that Asia is more connected than ever before. The rise of cities and the evolution of technology is allowing Asia to become the world's innovator, and this is very exciting. As such, there's obviously a vast array of opportunities from an investment point of view across the region. That makes this a great investing environment, but it isn't obviously without complexity. We believe areas such as renewable energy, such as smart city, such as consumer demand products and sectors, especially in scale markets like Korea, Japan or China, present investors with very significant deployment opportunities and obviously with quality returns. As we all know, investing is both a science and it's also an art. It's always critical that we know what we own and why we own it. We believe the sectors that we've discussed here today offer opportunities, but like all things, it requires the right selection. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Wei. 네, 벤 웨이 대표님 감사합니다.